Hi, I'm Nicole Ferraro, and this is The Divide, a podcast from Light Reading exploring the ongoing digital divide, why and where it still exists, and what needs to be done to get people everywhere connected to reliable, high-speed internet. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Paroma Sanyal, a principal at the Brattle Group. She joins the podcast to discuss a recent study published by the Brattle Group that explores the economic benefits of broadband access and specifically the broad economic benefits that were created by the Affordable Connectivity Program, which ran out of funding last year. We dive into the details of that study, as well as the economic consequences of not funding the ACP or a similar program, and more. Paroma, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the podcast. It's lovely to meet you.
Thank you, Nicole. Likewise.
Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about a study that the Brattle Group recently did on the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is a hot topic for me on this podcast. I've covered the ACP since its inception and tried to cover all of the ways that it was allegedly going to get refunded. And now here we are. But you guys recently put out a report basically showing how the ACP pays for itself. So we're going to go through that and then some. We're going to go through what you found in that report. But before we dive into all of that, I wanted to just give you an opportunity to briefly introduce yourself and the Brattle Group and what you do over there.
Sure. So I'm a principal at the Brattle Group's DC office, and I also co-lead our telecom, media, and entertainment practice. And the Brattle Group is one of the top economic consulting firms, and we have offices all over the U.S. and internationally, and work on various issues spanning from, telecom, energy, antitrust, consumer protection, finance, to name a few.
Indeed. Okay, great. So let's talk about the actual study. Before we get into the details, the specifics, tell me a bit about why you guys did this study. Who commissioned it? What did you set out to learn? Let's start there.
Great. So, this is something, the interest in the ACP has been a longstanding interest of mine and some of my co-authors. Especially given my background, I came to the Brattle Group from the FCC, where I was the Wireless Bureau's chief economist. The subsidy programs and how it impacts various population has been a very deep interest of mine. And then during the pandemic, when the emergency broadband program was instituted, and I think, all saw what positive impacts it had, and then it evolved into the ACP. I had very closely followed that research and seen what was happening. And then when there was talk about ACP ending in April 2024, that really piqued my interest in what the impacts were and what, as economists, we could do to help convince the lawmakers that this was a really worthwhile program. And unfortunately, we are in a consulting firm, not in academia, so it's not as easy to put out research. And when TrueConnect approached us to do this research, we were thrilled because this is something we really wanted to do independently and thought that there was a lot, there was a lot of important things that needed to be brought in front of lawmakers.
Yes, indeed. And I, as a journalist, am always happy to see research like this actually come out because it helps us tell the story better. So I was very happy to see this report and what it illuminates. I want to talk about what you uncovered about the benefits of ACP, but in general, from your research and from your professional experience, what can you tell us just about the economic benefits of broadband access?
That's been, as you know, a very long-standing question about what it is that broadband does and what the impacts are. I mean, globally, there are a lot of studies that talk about the impact on GDP. And even in the US, people have found there's a significant impact of increasing broadband penetration on GDP. And if you sort of peel that apart, what you find is, there's increased investment, job creation, there's increased labor market participation, entrepreneurship, and innovation. and increased participation in healthcare and health benefits from broadband. In fact, there is like a recent study that even links it to better mental health. So it's like all pervasive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes total sense. Okay, so let's get into how the ACP factors into all of this. So one of the areas that your report looked at was the ACP's cost savings in the realm of healthcare costs. So tell me a bit about what you guys uncovered there. How much savings were we seeing through having the ACP in terms of healthcare costs? What are the consequences if the ACP is not revived? Talk us through a little bit of the direct cost savings through the ACP on healthcare, and help me understand a bit how much of those savings went toward the federal government spending on healthcare versus otherwise. It's a big question, but I figure you can just talk us through what you guys ultimately learned about the ACP and healthcare in this report.
Sure. But let me begin at the beginning then, right?
Yeah.
Let's size the problem first. I think one of the first things that's important to understand is, currently estimates show that there are about 28 million households in the US that lack access to high speed broadband. And what is really concerning is that about 18 million households, which represents about 50 million people, remain unconnected not because there is no infrastructure, but because they cannot afford access to broadband. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that is the biggest impact that ACP had, because it's not having a broadband line pass by your house, it's whether you can afford it or not. And that's where ACP was a big solution. 16 million unconnected and underconnected households actually received high quality connection because of ACP. And a total of 23 million households connected through the ACP.
Yeah.
That's a large impact.
Yeah.
And what we try and do is talk about, if this goes away, what is the effect on the American economy? And the biggest impact that we talk about is healthcare. And in healthcare, there are a couple of things that you've asked me, right? One is the direct and indirect savings, and then talking about how the ACP pays for itself.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about the direct and indirect savings first. So, in terms of the direct savings, what we did was a cost benefit analysis, right? We looked at a couple of things and then broke it down. So, the first thing was, what are the costs and cost savings that we can attribute to the ACP? Second, we figured out, because of the ACP stoppage, how many households and individuals were going to lose connectivity. And the third thing we figured out is, because of this loss of connectivity, how many telehealth visits were going to be lost. And we put all this together to come up with the cost savings. And spoiler alert, what we found was, with the ACP going away, there is a $29 to $30 billion cost savings that's going to be lost from these telehealth savings not occur.
Say that again, just for the people in the back.
So just from the telehealth cost savings alone,
Yeah.
the American economy would lose 29 to $30 billion from the ACP going away.
And remind us how much the ACP actually was costing per year.
The ACP was costing $7.3 billion.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Okay, go on. Was there more you wanted to say there since I cut you off?
No, not at all. This was great. No, I mean,
Okay.
anybody who's interested in how the sausage
Yeah.
is made can read our paper, but that, I think, is pretty much the highlight
Yeah.
of the savings.
Yeah, that's absolutely significant. Uh, Can we talk about Medicaid then? Because Medicaid came up in your report a lot. And I've previously had conversations with analysts who, during the whole ACP battle, were trying to figure out, ways that we could still fund this program. And one idea was to fund it through a program like Medicaid, where we're seeing so many of the benefits of people being able to get online. Was that something you thought about as you were going through this study and seeing how much could be saved by the federal government through having people using telehealth?
That is a great question. And it's interesting. We also, you had Blair Levin, I think, on this
Yeah.
podcast and other.
Specifically the analyst I'm talking about. So go ahead. Yeah.
Exactly. And so we've had conversations with him, and he was the one who encouraged us to really sort of think through and figure out where the savings would come from. So
Yeah.
I can truly say that was one of the genesis of how we started thinking about this. And then, once we went into this, we started thinking about scoring. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason we started thinking about that is my colleague, Coleman Bazelon, had been at the CBO for years and is an expert in the scoring. And the idea of the score, as you know, Nicole, the CBO, the congressional budget, develops these scores every year, and they focus on a policy's impact on the federal budget. So it's not really a cost benefit, but basically at the start of every year, it produces a baseline budget and then scores every legislation against it. And what we set out to do in the study is figure out if this cost savings from ACP, how much of that could be scored and under the federal budget, whether it could be a savings, and whether just the savings alone could be funded through Medicare. And what we found was a majority of the ACP funding, which is like $7.3 billion for the year, a majority of it, like $6 billion, would be a cost savings that's scorable under the federal portion of Medicaid funding, which basically tells you that most of the programs could pretty much be funded through the Medicare support.
Very interesting. Okay. So should Medicare exist in the future? Maybe that's an option. Okay. All right. Let me not go there right now. Let's move on to another area that you guys looked at in this report, which is the ACP's impact on participation in education and the workforce. So what were your main takeaways here in terms of access to the ACP's impact on education, the labor market, and income? And what should we be concerned about if the ACP is not reinstated?
So there were two things we thought about when looking at the impact of education, impact of the ACP on education. The first one was the impact of broadband on education through various scores. And the second was the increased education that you see because of ACP, the impact on household wages and earnings. Because people talk about, yes, scores have increased, but then the question is, so what? Fine,
Mm-hmm.
they've increased. And it's a so what, and it's that connection that we wanted to make. So what we find in this study is that headline, the percentage increase that we find in earnings due to broadband access is about 7 to 8%, depending on whether you're male or female. And what we do is first, we take a look at the expected income of children in ACP disconnected households. And then we figure out if scores of these children increase because of broadband access, what will be the impact on their future earnings for 10 years from now? And sort of in aggregate, what we find is that the annual income effect in 10 years is going to be somewhere about $4 billion. Not a small change.
Nope, not at all. Yeah. That's pretty significant. You mentioned male versus female, and your study did also show that the ACP had a particularly positive impact on women's participation in the workforce. Am I correct in that? And can you shed any light on what you learned there?
Yes. So for that particular effect, we actually leaned very heavily on a University of Southern California study that did a very detailed study on how ACP affected labor force participation. And what they found was that it had a significant impact on women's participation, where women qualifying for the ACP saw like 1.2 percentage point increase in labor force participation, which is about 1.8% above the baseline rate of participation. So we use that along with the fact that women's participation increase actually leads to wage increases for both men and women in the economy. And we put these two estimates together to come up with the impact of ACP on labor force participation and consequently wages.
Mm-hmm. Okay, gotcha. So, a lot of really important data in this study, and I'm really again really appreciative to see all of this being pulled together. You've been in this field for a while. Was there anything that surprised you in studying the ACP's impact on the economy and economic factors?
Um, I would not say surprise because a lot of researchers have been really out there talking about the importance of this program and the economic impacts. But what did surprise me, Nicole, was we were extremely conservative in who we counted as disconnected households.
Mm-hmm.
You will see we come out at only 5 million households being truly affected. Now, this
Yeah.
is an underestimate because the way we count the 5 million households is complete disconnects. But
Mm-hmm.
there are probably another 5 or 6 million households who only have intermittent access because they can't afford it every year.
Right.
Even in that scenario, finding a 29 to $30 billion impact was fairly significant.
Right. And yeah, your report mentions, there were 5 million disconnects. Like you say, that's a conservative estimate, but that a majority of these were in the wireless segment. And I know that that's been a bit of a sticking point around the ACP. Obviously, TrueConnect is in favor of wireless being part of the ACP. And there are groups that would advocate for a future version of this program to not include wireless connectivity. But I think that um, to exclude mobile from this program ignores some of the ways that people use mobile connectivity. For example, mobile phone can be a hotspot for you to use on your laptop, or having affordable mobile or free mobile connectivity might mean that your family can afford the fixed broadband line that you also need. I guess I'm trying to just illuminate the fact that sometimes lawmakers look at a program and say, well, this is funding mobile and therefore it's not a broadband program. But there are lots of ways that low-income families make decisions about their bills and what they can afford each month that aren't, so cut and dry when you look at them on a paper. So having this benefit for mobile also enables families to use broadband, whether it's on their cell phone or using it as a hotspot, or being able to still afford broadband, a fixed connection, by having a free, mobile line. Does that reasoning make sense to you the way I'm thinking about it?
Yes, and I want to add something to that.
Please.
If you look at the Pew Research, a lot of families now are shifting to a mobile primary connection versus a fixed line. And especially in the lower income population, in a lot of cases, the mobile is your primary connection.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, it's really important to have mobile in the mix. Otherwise, you are cutting off a lot of the very people that you want to benefit through this program.
Right. Right. Okay, great. So final question for you. We're obviously talking at a time of general uncertainty around everything, the future of federal grants and loans and benefit programs. Unlike last year, there is not an active bill running through Congress trying to refund the ACP. Another avenue that people had been considering was rolling the ACP into a lifeline program under the USF, the Universal Service Fund. Of course, the Universal Service Fund is awaiting its own fate with the Supreme Court. And, this is just an entirely different political environment than previously. So what is a realistic path forward? You've put out this great research, you've proven the case. What do we do now? What's a realistic path for restoring the ACP? Should we still leave it up to the federal government under these circumstances? Or should more states step in here against the will of a lot of the telecom groups? What do you think? What now is my question to you.
If only I could read the tea leaves.
It's a completely unfair question.
I will tell you what my personal sort of thoughts are.
Sure.
And ideally, this should be a federal program because this is something that needs to be tackled as a nation and needs to have sort of the same sort of access no matter where you're residing in the United States. But if the federal funding didn't come through, I think the states themselves are well positioned to take this up and to fund this program, especially since I think one thing to remember is even the impacts we estimate are direct impacts. There are billions of dollars of indirect impacts from this program. Right. So even from just the dollars and cents aspect of it, states will really stand to gain a lot if they fund something that looks similar to the ACP program.
That's a great point. All right. I think I've monopolized enough of your time. I really appreciate you taking some time to chat with us about this, and I hope you'll come back. It was great to chat with you.
Nicole, thank you so much. I love chatting with you, and this is an important topic. So I hope going forward, there is some positive solution to this.
Same here. I hope so too. And I look forward to celebrating it with you whenever it comes through. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Paroma, for joining me. Thank you as well to Pierre Landriau for editing this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Light Reading Podcast for more episodes of The Divide, as well as interviews and insights from the Light Reading team. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.